On today's episode of the Zweig Letter Podcast, we're diving into the journey of a young architect who's reshaping what it means to design with purpose. Carley Chastain didn't take the straight path from Alabama to Montana, from Boston to Kigali, Rwanda. She's built homes, hospitals, and community hubs with one question in mind: how can design serve the people it touches? She's worked with international nonprofit leaders like Mass Design Group, learned from the celebrated Rural Studio program, and now brings that global perspective home, literally, to Northwest Arkansas, where she's part of the team at Marlin Blackwell Architects. Carley is part of a new generation of professionals in the AEC space, people who are just as concerned with resilience, equity, and community impact as they are with blueprints and budgets. So whether you're a young designer, a seasoned firm leader, or someone just curious about where architecture is headed, this conversation is for you.
Welcome to the Zweig Letter Podcast, putting architectural, engineering, planning, and environmental consulting advice and guidance in your ear. Zweig Group's team of experts have spent more than 3 decades elevating the industry by helping AEP and environmental consulting firms thrive. And these podcasts deliver invaluable management, industry, client, marketing, and HR advice directly to you, free of charge. The Zweig Letter Podcasts, elevating the design industry one episode at a time.
Hey folks, Randy Wilburn here from the Zweig Letter Podcast. Excited to be with you for another episode. We've got something really special for you today. We're joined by Carley Chastain from Marlin Blackwell Architects, along with my partner in crime, Luke Carruthers from the marketing department. And he's a man about town on so many levels at Zweig Group. Luke and Carley, it's so good to see you guys. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Randy. Thanks for asking. It's great to be here. Carley and I got the chance to connect earlier this year at the Mass Timber Design Conference at the University of Arkansas, and I was really impressed with her ability to connect passion and purpose with her work. So I'm really excited. I'll stop talking and let her talk. I'm just excited.
He's setting you up, Carley.
He really did. Running around that Mass Timber Conference with Luke was a delight, because I'll tease a little bit of what I'd like to talk about. It's so important in the architecture space to know people who do other things than practice architecture. And I would consider Luke one of my favorite contacts within the industry at large. And getting to talk to him about the work going on locally was fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a great perspective that Luke brings to the table, and Zweig Group in general, as somebody that works on, not necessarily in the business, but on the business of architecture and design. It brings a different perspective, and it can really be helpful to practitioners like yourself and your colleagues at Marlin Blackwell, as well as any of the other firms that Zweig Group comes in contact with. So, I want to jump right into it, because you have a wealth of experience for such a young person. I want to ask you, what first drew you to architecture and, specifically nonprofit community-based work?
That's a great question. I know a lot of people who grew up playing with Lego sets or playing in Sims and said, this is what I want to do with my life. I was not one of those people. I thought that I would go into psychology. I thought that I would go into forest management. There were a lot of different options on the table. But when I went to Auburn University and toured the architecture building, I was completely captivated by the energy. It wasn't like anything I'd ever seen. The buzz, the dedication, the purpose were signals to me that this was going to be more than just a job, more than just a 9-to-5, but something that could direct my life.
And I mean, and Auburn has a really special program there. I would love for you maybe to kind of unpack your experience at Auburn specifically. I mean, you are in Arkansas now, but Auburn holds a special place in your heart, for the time that you were there for school, but then also for all of the things that you learned. Could you talk just a little bit about their program and why it is so important for people to learn about it?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. For all your listeners out there that are Auburn fans or not, I want to give a quick War Eagle. But Auburn University is known within the architectural department for a variety of incredible programs, actually. The urban studio and the rural studio are both fifth-year options for students completing the architecture program. In the urban studio, you go to Birmingham and work one-on-one with city planners and local architects to understand urban design. But in rural studio, you go out to Hale County, Alabama, which is one of the poorest counties in the entire U.S., to engage in rural development practices and design build, in which you and a team of typically 3 other fifth-year students will be given a project brief for a local community project and work together to interface with the community and design and build a project for that community. And that really set the tone for what I viewed as the rest of my practice so far.
Yeah. And were you fully aware of those 2 options when you first started at the U of A program, at the Auburn University program?
I was only peripherally aware, actually. My parents are both big Auburn fans and raised me in Auburn shirts and Auburn rooms with Auburn songs on the radio. And I swore that I wouldn't go, actually. Sorry to say. I thought that, what I really wanted was to go a little bit further afield. But when I saw that architecture department, I was captivated and wanted to do a little bit more research before I dove headlong into it, and found out that Auburn architecture was at the time rated one of the top undergrad programs for architecture in the country. And looking into it, realized that it was because of, in no small part due to some of the programs that Auburn offers, including the 2 that I mentioned, as well as study abroad programs and other pretty incredible development opportunities. And so when I started, the idea of what I would do with my 5th year was impossibly distant. Wasn't quite sure where I would end up by year 5. And in fact, a couple years into it, started to wonder if this was the right thing, because, architecture school, like a few other undergraduate programs, really takes students that are used to a high school structure of here's an assignment that you need to deliver, and I will give you a grade based off of how well you deliver this assignment. A good architecture program will upend that expectation and give students open-ended questions to solve. And that flipped my world upside down. And I started to wonder, what this could actually look like in practice. And some of the more successful practices in Alabama, at least the ones that I was exposed to, were involved or served clientele that I think were typically doing really well for themselves. And that was not something that I found too interesting. I grew up in a world that was not particularly engaged with the design of our built environment, even as much as, the typical American will spend 90% of their time inside. And we don't have a sort of a public understanding of how our spaces are designed, or we don't participate in how our spaces are designed, especially if you live in a single family home in a typical American town. And this whole world was completely new to me. And I thought I was maybe a little bit out of place. I would ask my classmates, do you have parents who do this? What do your parents do? That was my number one question. I would ask all the classmates, what do your parents do? And a lot of them, they would say, oh, my parents are contractors, or my parents are real estate agents. And I thought that I really was at some sort of disadvantage for not having sort of this prior experience with the way that this profession functions. And I was getting a little bit dissuaded from an engagement with the industry, right? Because how in the world am I supposed to engage in the culture that I knew with this profession that I've picked? And then one day we had a lecture at Auburn done by Michael Murphy, one of the co-founders of Mass Design Group. And I thought, this is a new way of practicing that I hadn't been exposed to yet. And I wanted to stick with my program and apply to the Rural Studio, which engages in that community design aspect. And we have some incredible project briefs at the Rural Studio, and architects practicing from all over the world will come in and critique our work and talk to us about our projects and tell us, you are so lucky to be doing something like this. I wish I was doing something like this. And I would always think, okay, but how would I be able to do work like this when I leave? because I'm on the receiving end of a brief, but that doesn't mean that as an architect, I know how to go out and get that work. So I was always fascinated with not just what the students were doing at Rural Studio, but what the staff were doing, because they were the ones working behind the scenes over the summer throughout the year to interview clients, to understand pre-existing conditions. Do you own your land? Do you have infrastructure? Do you have sewer? Do you have wastewater? Do you have plumbing? And then filtering that information to then set up the students for success when we got there. And I thought if I didn't understand how that process worked, then I was potentially doomed to, practice on the receiving end, in which I wasn't playing an active role in how projects get decided or what projects are needed. I would only ever be downstream of what someone else wanted. And that's not to say that that's a bad thing, but I wanted a broader view of how development work and how construction work happens, not only in the US, but in other countries.
Yeah. Well, I love that. Luke, were you going to say something?
No, I was going to say one of the things that I was particularly interested going into this interview is that you clearly have a passion for the built environment, not specifically just architecture, but kind of the interconnected nature of it. So one of the things I was interested in was what was the space that made you understand or want to engage with architecture in the built environment. So it's very interesting to me that you entered it not through a family connection or something when you were young. It was a physical space when you were visiting a college, which I think speaks to the power of the Auburn Design Studio, but it's a nice bookmark for this conversation, or bookend, that our first conversation took place in the Fay Jones Design Building at the University of Arkansas, which is personally my favorite space that made a lot click for me. So I just think it's a really interesting genesis point for a career.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And so, because I kind of see where you're going, Carley, with how you're describing your experience. So what I want to do is maybe just quickly unpack that experience specifically with the Rural Studio before we jump into Mass Design Group, because it sounds like the Mass Design Group was really what laid the foundation for you to have the experience on the front end that you talked about, of looking at things from a developer perspective, from a Genesis perspective, as opposed to just the receiving end of, hey, we need you to design something, right? And there's a difference there. But one of the projects, and you shared it with me, and we'll put a link on the in the show notes for this, but tell us about the $20,000 house project from Rural Studio. What was it like to design and build that?
Oh man, talk about in over your head. So for folks doing their homework and doing some research, I would always encourage people to look up some visual support media for these sort of conversations. What was once known as the 20K house project has now been rebranded to the Front Porch Initiative, because 20K is really exciting. I would love to spend 20K on a house. But in this day and age, 20K on a house means that you end up in a cardboard box, maybe with a septic system. And that was born out of conversations when this program first started. So this is a subset program of the Rural Studio. Rural Studio will often deliver project briefs to its students as either community projects that may be sort of singular projects unto themselves in communities surrounding Hale County and the surrounding counties. We also have a long-running research project, which is formerly known as the 20K House Project, now known as the Front Porch Initiative, which is a bit of a research project in which they started building single-family homes in a rural setting back in 2001 with the goal of competing with local prices for a trailer, perhaps, right? So trailers will depreciate in value the second you walk off with them, but a house will allow someone to develop equity in the land that they own or equity in the community that they live in. So using design principles, material selection, and radical reconsideration of the way that housing is delivered in a rural setting, the Rural Studio's Front Porch Initiative strives to examine obstacles to home ownership in rural communities. So one of my favorite stories about the Front Porch Initiative is actually a project that's not in the Front Porch Initiative at all. It's actually the fire station in New Bern, Alabama. Because during this process, of building homes for people in this rural community, the team discovered the other obstacles to homeownership, such as fire insurance. And insurance prices for the homes in these areas were exorbitant because the closest fire department was a 25-minute drive away. And they realized that to, better the community and bring everybody that much closer to attaining homeownership and equity was to build a volunteer fire station. And that is so exciting to understand the systems at work and the challenges that you're trying to address on a community level. The fact that Rural Studio would have the bandwidth, the foresight to say, if we're going to keep doing housing for individuals, we need to provide community infrastructure. It's one of my favorite projects. It's so fantastic, from a material standpoint and a detailing standpoint, but also from a systems standpoint. It works on so many different levels. And I love going by there anytime I'm in New Bern.
In New Bern. Now, is New Bern part of Hill County?
Yes, New Bern is a part of Hill County.
Okay, very
the
cool.
Rural Studio program is headquartered.
Yeah.
And just north of us is Greensboro, which is the county seat, and where many students, including myself, end up finding lodgings.
Yeah, about that. There. So, it's funny, not that you blew my mind, but you did say something that I honestly never thought about. The proximity of a fire station in relationship to the cost of insurance and things of that nature. And the reason why I'm not thinking of it like that is because where I live here in Fayetteville, literally on the next block is my fire station. So, I mean, they would be at my house before I hung up the phone, right?
Oh, yeah.
And you never, you take those things for granted that, especially in rural areas, that could be a real issue. And then, of course, you got the insurance costs. Insurance is already expensive, let alone adding to the fact that, because you're so far away from the local fire department, we've got to charge you more, or we can't insure you.
Yeah, or this is cost prohibitive. You think that you have saved up what you need to start a construction loan for your dream house, and it turns out your insurance cost is going to be 25% of your monthly payment on your mortgage.
Wow. Yeah.
And, not to skip too much in the chronology, but I'm working on a project right now in a rural setting in another state where a huge consideration is water. We have to meet code requirements for fire suppression, given the client that we're working with. And the local water source is at 98% capacity. What do we do? Do we drill? A test drill costs $20,000. Do we talk with the Water Association? Do we build fire or water tanks, water towers? What's in our budget? What do we need to do? Rural projects in and of themselves are so much more complicated than people give them credit for. And I think it takes a particular kind of practice to be able to engage in some of those. My boss, Marlon, has a saying that he sort of passes around the office, which is, we talk about vernacular, right? Because vernacular is really important to building in rural settings. And what's said is vernacular is what you do when you can't afford to get it wrong.
Yeah. I like that. Huh.
But your original question was about the Front Porch Initiative and, to kind of maybe bring in some narrative conclusion on that. That was my project brief when I was there with my team, is we did the 21st version of what was known then as a 20K home. We did a 2-bedroom home in adjacent Perry County, Alabama, for a local client there who owned land that had been subdivided from, I believe, a father or a grandfather who had lived on the land before him.
Wow.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the parts of the initiative is that these homes can be replicated, that there is that those blueprints can be used exactly for another project.
They often are. Yeah. They took the house that we designed while we were there, and they have replicated it a few times since. They built it to a different energy standard in Opelika, Alabama, which is outside of Auburn, with, I believe it was Habitat for Humanity. And then they used that house to run energy tests and see how it stood up. Part of the question that the program asks is, as architects, we're only one step in the process, and receiving a brief, designing the project, documenting it, and issuing construction documents are what you may view as sort of the typical scope of work of an architect on a residential project. If we're involved in a residential project at all, it's pretty rare because by code, we don't have to be. But the second those plans leave our hands and go into the hands of a contractor, what are prevailing practices in the area? What are local resources in the area? what is the comfort of the different trades that practice in that area with taking those plans and saying, go above and beyond and tape every seam and seal every joint so that the house is airtight and meets particular standards to provide, miles of energy efficiency over what you may typically see in a neighborhood of spec homes in a development in a town like Opelika, Alabama.
I love the iterative nature of your experiences with this, because one thing has kind of built on another to inform, it seems like maybe how you even approach design, right?
Oh
As
gosh.
an architect, like 100%. So, and from that vein, I'd love for you maybe to talk a little bit about how your experience, specifically as you moved on from the rural studio, your experiences with Mass Design Group and your time in Kigali kind of shaped your approach to design.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. So, I mentioned earlier that I kind of had this desire to see what was going on outside of my state. I wanted to get context. I remember writing actually a scholarship application while I was in school that, ultimately I wanted to leave home and study and get context. This sort of feeling of being, from outside the industry compelled me to go get some context. And I wanted to leave the state, maybe leave the country, get some experience and bring it home. And the first opportunity that I got to do so, would love to, plug and shout out here to the Hundredfold Studio in Kalispell, not in Kalispell, the Hundredfold Studio in Lakeside, Montana. They run a beautiful practice that engages in nonprofit architecture. And they were my first experience with a really intentional practice that engages in the education of staff and mission-aligned architecture. So the premise of the practice is that it is a community-oriented nonprofit, and they choose what they work on. And often their most common partner at the time, I believe, was YWAM, Youth with a Mission. Mm-hmm. So they had a partnership with a larger organization and a really incredible dialogue in which they would talk about what the organization needed at home or abroad and work to make sure those needs were met. So the project I worked on there at the time was for a local community center for YWAM in Lakeside. So the job site was like a couple hundred yards from the door of the office. Mm-hmm. Incredible. And the offices of the people running the community center were a couple hundred yards from the front door of the office. And it was so hyper local and such a beautiful space. And all of those things were intertwined. And I got to work there for about 5 months, working to learn energy modeling and energy analysis programs so that the projects that we built for people served them as best as possible. And then while I was there, did some phone interviews and accepted a fellowship program, my next fellowship program with a nonprofit architecture firm, Mass Design Group. And from Montana, went back to Alabama and packed a new set of bags because if you can imagine, I didn't really need my ski jacket in Rwanda.
Yeah. So I had different weather.
Exactly. So I had to swap out my ski jacket for breezy shirts, cotton, and I think I packed a suitcase and a backpack and went to Boston for some initiation training. Mm-hmm.
Because that's where Mass Design Group is based, right?
That's right. That's right. Their American headquarters is in Boston, and then their Rwandan headquarters is in the capital city, Kigali. Mm-hmm. And in the Boston office, I'm sure things have fluxed quite a bit. They now have a few different satellite offices throughout the country. But in the Boston office, I think it was maybe something like 10 to 20 people. But in the Kigali office, it's a multidisciplinary office of folks from many different countries. And they were, over 100 people when I worked there in 2018.
Okay. How long were you there?
I was there for 14 months.
Wow. Mm-hmm. That's exciting. Luke, you got a question?
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I love that you mentioned that desire for context. And Randy, you mentioned the iterative experience of your education. And I'm really curious, and I think Randy is too. You go across the world. What brings you back to the South? What made you take a chance on Marlon Blackwell?
Oh, man. Working for Marlon Blackwell is not necessarily a chance I took on him, but probably more of a chance he took on me. I came into his firm with about 2 years of experience in non-traditional nonprofit work. When I worked at Mass, working in Kigali, we were completely local, working within the political infrastructure within Rwanda necessitated local solutions, politically and economically. What are you going to do? Import aluminum storefront from Kenya on your hospital project? No, we would fabricate windows and doors on site. And so what that looked like, get like technical here for a second, we would do fabrication drawings of windows and doors. So in my time there, I never saw a specification book, a project manual. And that's completely core to practicing in an American environment. So even though I'd had a couple of years of experience, that didn't necessarily equate to a couple of years of experience of someone who'd been practicing in the US. Now, I had quite the aura of someone who was willing to, hop around and learn and take chances and dive into things, but had a little bit of catching up to do. And so, diving into the practice at MBA was fascinating because in my 5 years working here, we're not just, a local firm here in Fayetteville, though we are. We're really, really proud to be a local firm in Fayetteville. I've had friends who've gone on and coworkers who've taken other opportunities and they report back like, I miss the systems at Marlon Blackwell Architects' office. Like the way that we're able to like organize and vet and discuss and design is incredibly unique. And I'm so, so lucky. Like all these experiences that I had in Alabama engendered this like real like sense of importance in local design. Alabama, Montana, Kigali. When I worked in Alabama, I worked in my community. When I worked in Montana, I worked in my community. When I worked in Kigali, same thing. I worked on a design project where we were doing a biomedical center, a center of excellence, and took that through design. And then they told me to, switch gears while they were trying to figure out how to get that project off the ground. And I was going to go work construction administration on a local hospital. And every day I'd get on the back of a motorcycle and drive to site and inspect the fabrication of those windows and doors I talked about and try to solve problems that came up as we went along. And, I left Kigali, unbeknownst to me, right before COVID broke out, but the hospital had just opened. And I got news that hospital was one of the first to serve the first COVID patients in Kigali. And that was crazy. That was so important to me. And so coming to, Marlon Blackwell's firm here in Fayetteville, he's known within the profession for understanding local traditions and local materials. And I was like, there's no other way for me to do this at this point. So it's got to be this. I was, like I said, I wanted to, get context and then come back. And so I had a list of firms in the South, and Marlon had just won the gold medal for American practice from the American Institute of Architects. And
yeah, he's kind of a big deal.
Yeah,
He is.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I mean, we've had, I mean, we've kind of have, when it comes to architectural design in Northwest Arkansas, because that's actually where we're all sitting as we record this, we kind of have an embarrassment of riches of design professionals in this area. And I mean, you think about Faye Jones and his impact, and I mean, he sat under the man, Frank Lloyd Wright. And so, I mean, I just think that there is people don't, I know Arkansas is kind of a flyover state, but there's a lot happening here, and there's a lot of cool design work emanating throughout the world that starts right here in Arkansas. So I think it's worth mentioning. So
oh
I
my
guess,
gosh, no,
yeah.
it's true. No, so that actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because when I was looking at different firms that are like well known in the South for the kinds of practices that they do and the projects that they produce, I got wind that a lot of different, firms here were aiming to get on the design excellence list in Northwest Arkansas.
Yeah.
And I thought, like, I'm really lucky, really, really lucky to have ended up here, because from what I can tell, if I was at another firm, we might just be doing work here anyway.
Right.
But now
Yeah.
I get to be a part of that community and a part of that legacy. Like, no one has connections like Marlon Blackwell Architects staff has connections. That's not just Marlon, and he's so well connected. He's, been invested in this community for 33 years. But like the staff he retains, like we have so many talented Arkansans in this office whose dad's neighbor knows a guy who can like give us some insight as to, who to talk to at the city about this project under development, right? And that's so important.
Yeah, it is. So you've mentioned a couple of things I want to go back to real quickly before we move on. The hospital in Kigali. Now, you mentioned earlier in the podcast that because you didn't come from a traditional background that a lot of your peers did when you were matriculating through Auburn, maybe their parents were real estate agents or contractors or so on and so forth. But now your family has a healthcare background. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And
That's
how did that impact when you worked on healthcare projects, especially that hospital in Kigali? Did that in any way, shape, or form inform you in terms of how you approach the design, given that you have some familiarity with others that have, worked in that system?
It's such a good question. So when I say that my family has, background in healthcare, my dad works in pharmacy. My mom is in marketing for a toxicology company. My sister, big shout out to Dr. Chastain. She just entered into her residency program in North Carolina.
Bravo.
I know. Big snaps.
That's exciting.
Dr. Chastain. My uncle is my dentist. My brother's going into a mental health program for counseling. And so my background or any sort of exposure that I had actually had to do more with individual practitioners of healthcare, of maybe diagnosis and treatment. Working for Mass Design Group, specifically for the Global Health Core Fellowship, meant that I was introduced for the first time to public health, which was a foreign concept to me, but it was perfect because public health has to do with the infrastructure of our healthcare system. And architecture is the infrastructure of our built environment. So there are individual practitioners, right? Folks on the call, folks who are individually engaged within the system, but then there's the system itself. So it's, to sort of parallel the conversation, healthcare is not just about diagnosis and treatment, but about evaluating the systems in which we live to promote holistic preventative care. And that was such an interesting learning experience because, again, right after I moved to Arkansas, COVID breaks out. And all these conversations that I'd been having and learning about our public health systems, which is how are vaccines available and administrated? What's messaging around vaccines? What are our rules and guidelines for how we conduct ourselves in a public space in order to limit transmission of what might be a viral disease? Really, really moved to the spotlight. And the job that I was hired to do at MBA, the project that I was hired to staff, was the Heartland Whole Health Institute here in Northwest Arkansas. Which
how
is
appropriate.
I know, man. I'm like, I can't get away from this. I told them, I was like, I told my family, love that you guys are in healthcare. That's not my thing. I'm going to go do buildings. And then, of course, lo and behold, I'm on hospitals and community health centers and health institutions and having such interesting conversations about each of our individual practices, but then the context in which we practice.
Yeah. Well, and for the uninitiated that are listening to this podcast in other parts of the country, the Whole Health Institute is certainly a beacon of light here in Northwest Arkansas. It is part of the Alice Walton School of Medicine. There is a whole bigger program that's happening because Northwest Arkansas is one of the fastest growing MSAs in the country. And so we have needs for a little bit of everything. And when you have thankfully, one of the richest women in the world in Alice Walton that sees a need in healthcare and wants to fill that need right in the backyard where she grew up makes a huge difference. And it creates opportunities for people like Carley and for Marlon Blackwell Architects, as well as any other design firm that's in this area, as well as those that are in other parts of the country that are coming here to work and finding opportunity to be a part of the built environment right here in our own backyard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think we should also mention that it is one of the most beautiful structures in a place that has a lot of beautiful structures. It is truly breathtaking.
It's like they keep trying to outdo themselves every time I look up. I can't wait to see the finish of Crystal Bridges, which is our outstanding museum, because they're just doing a whole nother expansion of it. But yeah, every time I look up, if there's, what they always say is the indicator of the health of a city or an area are the number of cranes that you see in the air. And at one point, I lost count after 7 cranes in downtown Bentonville, not too far back. So yeah, that's always a good sign when you see that right here in Northwest Arkansas. So
Yeah, no, it's funny you say that. There was a report that I read and was integrating into a write-up for another project we did, The Ledger in downtown Bentonville, that stated that Bentonville has the highest cranes per capita of any city in the U.S.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think they overtook Miami or someplace like that. So it's pretty impressive. So
insane.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, there's so many different directions we can go, but I want to find a place where we can land this and be respectful of the amount of time that you've given us. We're so thankful for this. There are a couple of things that you said that I wanted to kind of piggyback on, because as a young design professional, I think it's important for your peers to hear this, but I would love for you to share your thoughts on how you see the role of architects evolving in the next 10 years. What do you think is possible for your profession, right, that will keep people in the profession? Because there are some that are leaving the profession for a variety of reasons. And that's one of the things that, as I've worked at Zweig Group over the years, I was always alarmed by, because we need design professionals, engineers, architects, environmental consultants, planners, construction management. We need all of those folks. We don't need anybody leaving the profession. But I would be curious to know, from your perspective, Carley, where do you see the role of architects evolving in the next 10 years? Or what do you hope for?
Oh, man.
I know that's a lot.
That's a huge question. Okay, so in my head, I'm like sort of splitting this into 2 actually different questions, because where do I hope the profession goes might actually be a little bit different than the health of the profession right now. So the question of retention is really important to me as a woman in the industry, because I think recently we passed a milestone, this might have been a couple of years ago, in which more than 50% of architecture graduates from an undergraduate program, over 50% of them are women.
And, I think we've seen some of the instances of opportunities that exist in this space, especially through programs like Elevate Her and others that are really making it a point to highlight women in the design profession at every level and in every vocation. And so I think it's important for us to kind of have that conversation, right? Because, you've talked about so many different things that you've experienced in your short time in the industry. And you've lived the lives of a couple of architects in this short time, and you still got a ways to go. So it's like, man,
I know, man.
So it's like, you got to be excited about what the future holds. And especially, I'm excited just hearing your story, because if more architects get to experience what you've experienced in such an early period in your profession, then there really is a lot of hope for where the design industry is going in the future, and I don't want to answer your question for you, but it's just an outside observer looking on the inside of what I've seen interacting with so many design professionals around the country, around the world for that matter.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think what I've done is capitalize on a privilege afforded to me by the status of my family and the ability to go to school, and then the ability again to use income-driven repayment plans on my student loans to go and make $600 a month at a nonprofit firm for 4 months, because I can. And I did those non-traditional experiences in order to explore different opportunities, and then transitioned into what is now a more traditional salaried professional trajectory within the firm that I work in in the US. But from a broader standpoint, that's not going to be everyone's experience. And the field can really do a number on you in the early years. So the stat that I wanted to look up and not misquote is that over 50% of architecture graduates are women, but only between maybe 17 to 23% of licensed architects are women. So in those years between getting out of school and getting the license that will allow you to practice yourself or capitalize on opportunities within a firm where you're employed, women drop off. And that's important because we need a diversity of life experiences to design the environment that we're living in.
Mm-hmm.
You need people from different backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds, racial backgrounds, gender backgrounds, to engage in this profession, because we are handing other people the built environment. We live in a specialized economy where we're all trying to do our part to make life easier for us collectively. And if we're delivering one note spaces to an increasingly diverse population here in the US, then architecture will continue to lose relevancy to the general public. And we will only ever be a profession that is dialed in and caters to the rapidly reducing number of people who can afford our services.
Okay.
So the future that I look to is one in which we have a diverse workforce that has advocacy, the local, state, and national level for the relevancy of our services, the health of the built environment, and, well-designed policies and planning for the spaces that we live in.
Yeah.
I was curious I love that when we talk about the future, you frame that from the perspective of retention. Recruitment and retention is what we do at Zweig Group. And so I wanted to hear that question from the framework of, if you're speaking to a firm leader that's trying to recruit young, passionate architects, you're not alone. There are other people that care, and they care very much. So if you're speaking to a firm leader, how would you tell them to recruit and kind of widen that net?
Oh, man. So I've never had to face the challenge of recruiting someone else. I've always been on the receiving end of that. And so speaking to the receiving end, I would want to see firm leaders that are engaging within their local community, that, keep relationships with people maybe at the city level or the local level, that know the phone number of the lumberyard, and that when I come into your firm, I can be equipped with those same resources to get good work done. That's huge. As well as being able to develop incoming work, a pipeline of work that continues to, benefit and build in that local community for the people that I care about, my neighbors, doing good work, well-detailed, attentive, not necessarily expensive, but intentional and well-crafted. Acknowledging that, architecture is a field, a very, very broad field involved in coordinating with a lot of different professions, and that it sort of takes understanding and maintaining relationships with those different professions to continually forward the quality of work that we do.
Yeah, that makes, I hear everything you're saying. You add personal and professional development to it, a strong mentoring program. There are a number of things that a firm can do, all of which I know you're getting at Marlin Blackwell. These are, it's clear, and that makes a huge difference. And I tell firm leaders all the time, it's not rocket science, but you have to be intentional about making sure that those things are happening and making sure that it's not an afterthought, because a lot of times people just try to bolt something on. And we all know what happens when you bolt something on that wasn't originally intended to be part of a structure. It doesn't usually last.
No, not if it's integrated from the beginning.
Yeah, exactly. So, man, this has been good. Carley, if anybody listening to this wants to just connect with you or get in touch with you, maybe another young professional, young peer that's heard this and was really encouraged by what you've shared and what your experiences have been up to this point as a design professional, what's the best way for them to get in contact with you?
Well, that's a great question. My email is carley@marlinblackwell.com. And you can reach out to me there, and I will answer any sort of questions of that nature. What's going on? How's work? We want to get a coffee.
Yeah, I love that. If they're local. If they're not local, just reach out to her. She might even get on a Zoom call with you and have a conversation. But I suspect that you'll probably see Carley speaking at events somewhere, whether on either coast or somewhere in the middle of the country at some point in time, about her experiences. Because, guys, we just scratched the surface of what this young lady has been able to do in the design industry in a short period of time. And so I'm just excited, because if Carley represents what the design industry can look forward to and with design professionals, we're in good hands. So Carley, I wish you nothing but continued success. And I don't want to put a period here, but I want to put a comma, because I want to come back at some point in time and continue this conversation on, because I know you're going to continue to do some great stuff. So
Randy, that is so kind. Thank you so very much for having me, and
absolutely
all the conversations. This is a really, really wonderful opportunity for me to reflect on work and, realign what I'm doing even today
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that, and be sure to share this episode with Marlon when it comes out, or I'll send it to him because I do know Marlon. Man. So yeah,
okay, great.
I've had the pleasure of sharing a stage with him, but he's an outstanding individual, a wonderful human being first, and a great architect. So that's a good combination to have. So anyway, Carley Chastain, thank you for joining us today on this Zweig Letter podcast. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys. Thank you, Randy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you so much, Carley.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Luke, thank you for joining me again, as always. I appreciate you running it back with me to have another great conversation with another great design professional. I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up here. I'm Randy Wilburn, the host of the Zweig Letter podcast, along with my colleague, Luke Carruthers. We're excited that you're joining us here. Remember, the Zweig Letter podcast can be found on every major podcasting platform, including YouTube. If you want to learn more about Zweig Group, please visit us at zweiggroup.com. You can also subscribe for free to the Zweig Letter newsletter, which comes out every Monday, rain or shine. I'm your host, Randy Wilburn, and we'll see you back here soon with another Zweig Letter podcast. Peace.
Thanks for tuning in to the Zweig Letter podcast. We hope that you can be part of elevating the industry, and that you can apply our advice and information to your daily professional life. For a free digital subscription to the Zweig Letter, please visit thezweigletter.com/subscribe to gain more wisdom and inspiration, in addition to information about leadership, finance, HR, and marketing your firm. Subscribe today.